After the Cataclysm, there's a lot of different things within the cities of the Imperium that can just kill you. You've got your usual mundane things, murder, starvation, disease. You've then got the industrial side of it, being caught in some kind of machines, stuck under a train track, falling on the rails, being electrocuted. Then you have the supernatural side of it. You've got demons, ghosts, possessions, vampires, and those lists only grow in length the more specific you get in them. And the one thing that's meant to be holding the Imperium together, all these cities, law and order, yeah, that'll kill you as well. Hi, hello, and welcome back to our favorite rogue heist ghost RPG, Blades in the Dark, where it's corruption all the way down. But no, the city is really corrupt. Which, I mean, what could you have expected from everything else that's been described to Doskvol? You think that situation is run by people who have some kind of vested interest in it? Listen, they're only there for profit and trying to hold on to what bits of power they have left. Cronyism, getting specifically picked, nepotism, nobility tying themselves back in their internal bickering, and money. You can never get past money and good old bribery. So within the city of Doskvol, beginning from the top, the Lord Governor. So the Lord Governor themselves is not actually necessarily from Doskvol. They might be, it doesn't need to be, because the Lord Governor position is appointed by the Emperor. They're meant there for imperial interests and imperial edicts. While the city council itself, which we'll touch on shortly, can deal with its own internal squabbling with local issues, the Lord Governor is here to express the will of the immortal emperor. And to help with enforcing that will, they're also the one in charge of actually commanding the military and warships of the fleet locally. The Imperial fleet specifically, not any of the Leviathan ships. And it's not just in a fancy kind of offhanded way of, hey, I'm in charge of commanding the military to an extent. The Lord Governor's palace is a garrison. It's made up of an old fort over on White Crown. And I also want to state the size of this stronghold. Like, here's the whole map. Here's White Crown specifically. Here's one of the campuses of the university. That's big. That's just a big fortress. The governor's palace is less just an actual, fancy royal palace to an extent, and it's more like the ending tower in Dishonored, intimidating. So in general, they enforce the local imperial edicts and imperial interests. So Empire says something needs to be done, they step in, overrule a council. Namely overruling by the fact that they have the whole military and warships there, at least the Doskvol section of it. But where they do step in with local interests is when there's a tie on the city council. And outside of that vote, the edicts and military themselves are actually quite standoffish. Again, they're not in active war, there's not necessarily anything directly threatening the city as a whole. Essentially, the Lord Governor can kind of just sit back, it's just keeping the status quo. The city council, which is our next, is where things get a bit more direct. Not necessarily in its application or enforcement, but in how everything's actually handled and managed. So on the city council, there are 6 seats. Each of these seats are occupied by a member of the nobility, which is voted in by the members of the existing council when one dies or retires. They draft and approve legislature, public works, and city ordinance. Also control of distributing the city's treasury and the taxation to fuel said treasury. They also appoint the commander of the watch, which we'll get into a bit more when we head to the watch. Next up is one that's been brought up a few different times, the Ministry of Preservation. Again, like the Lord Governor, this is appointed by the Emperor in the capital, and is something that's tied to the whole Imperium itself. It's looking over the provisions of different cities, what needs to be shipped from rail lines, both externally and internally. So how is each city doing individually, and what needs to be taken from one city to another. Which is actually why Doskvol can still kind of feed itself, even though half of everything's imported. It's up to these guys. Though on top of the general things of food, medicine, managing diseases, and all that, they also look over the spark rights. Or at least oversee the ones working on the lightning towers, not the whole guilds themselves. Because those lightning towers are very important to the preservation of the Imperium. Also, while it's not directly stated, I wouldn't doubt that the Leviathan blood is also something that comes into question. Another set of individuals, and quite a few that are appointed by the city council, are the magistrates. Your rough judge role, but not quite, issuing warrants, looking over evidence, making judgments on certain cases specifically. Again, there's no juries tied to this, it is just the magistrate. And in general, when it comes to that, bribery, you should bribe. Because at this level, and especially when we get down to the City Watch as well, bribery becomes a primary factor. Because even in the book's own words, there is no actual look over law or jurisprudence, it's just your connections and how much money you have. What can you threaten or offer them? And how do the magistrates do any of this? With the City Watch, which the commander of the watch looks over that we talked about. But while all the magistrates were appointed and picked by the different members of the city council, the individual watch or Bluecoats are appointed by just the commander of the watch. Sure, they're set up by the council, but outside of that, hey, cronyism, pick your best friends or buds. But in seeking their general role of encouraging compliance with the law, they do the usual things you kind of expect of a guard or city watch. Going around the streets, patrolling, staying watch, sending people off to the Iron Hook prison and looking over it themselves. But really, with said cronyism, and the magistrates themselves already a bit corrupt or individually appointed for just benefits, the watch itself operates more like another gang. Just one that's officially helping everyone up top. The policing force of a city being used to put down the poor and helpless, all for the people already in charge and in power. Yeah. What's really fun game-wise is the Bluecoats themselves aren't necessarily just treated as like a faceless everyman guard, they are one of their own factions within the book. So really playing into the fact that, yeah, they basically are just another gang. Now while the Magistrates and Bluecoats are both possibly corrupted and definitely corrupted, the investigators being brought in from outside have a reputation for being anything but. It doesn't mean they can't be, but they have a reputation for being very stern. So the inspectors specifically are appointed by the Lord Governor, and kind of just act as your general detective role, where again the City Watch and Bluecoats are just the bobbies on the street. This is the actual one doing a lot of the investigating and police work. And of note, they're under the Lord Governor, not the Commander of the Watch, which is under the Council. On top of that bit of separation, there's also the fact that they're almost always foreigners, and specifically ones with as little tie to Doskvol as possible, or wherever they are locally, trying to keep them away from any of that corruption or relation to another group, potential ties to some noble family or other kinds of blackmail locally, but have a reputation for being supposedly incorruptible. There is another one that's kind of on authority, but it's only just over the undead side of everything. The Spirit Wardens. Now after doing things for this video and researching them a bit, I definitely feel they fit more into like the haunted city angle, the different types of ghosts and how that works. But keeping it a bit short, individually appointed by the Mortal Emperor. They are an organization that doesn't listen to the Lord Governor, not following its imperial interests. The local head of the Spirit Wardens is set up, and they just focus on their one job. Similar to the Preservation, they're the ones focusing on just the undead side of everything, and the other weird spiritual stuff. But with all this, and how do you use this, where does this come up? With the Academy video, that can come up, it can be used, it doesn't really need to. It's kind of a fun background, flavorful thing in some locations. Or the magic angle, that is something that's going to come up a lot more often, especially if you're playing into Whisper. But Law and Order, in a game all about heists and being scoundrels, that's going to come up. This is going to happen. Or at least things that you're going to have to deal with, either as the gang, individual members, or scoundrels, or just on a basic job. You're going to bump into Bluecoats. Let alone what happens with the Magistrate later on, how the nobles are bickering and their own internal fighting with the city council, how that's going to affect the whole city, or a specific constable getting on your tail. Because sure, you might be screwed if you don't have money to bribe Bluecoats or Magistrates, but you might be living large, super well off with your gang and all the previous jobs that you've gone on, and then a constable comes to you. This is the threat within the game, that thing that you can't just bribe away. And even above that, the Lord Governor, if you get involved with the Lord Governor's stronghold, that's just the military now. And the Ministry of Preservation themselves, even though they don't have necessarily anything specifically they can enforce, when it comes to a specific edict, they act that out. They say something is needed for the city, the Lord Governor helps to enforce that, the City Watch is just meant to employ it. What gets finicky is when certain things run low, because a rarity helps with the smuggling business, and the Ministry of Preservation tries to ward that off, so you know, maybe grease a few palms there if you're a smuggler. In fact, grease palms everywhere. Spend as much as you can on bribery, because that's the only way you're gonna keep out of Ironhook prison. Or worse. Definitely possibly worse. But once again, in the all rogues game, this is gonna come up. You're the scoundrels, you're the gangsters, you're the people trying to make it in this really, really unfair system and world. Which leans into the other angle not talked about too often. The vigilante angle. The city's corrupt. The law can't be trusted, the people enforcing everything are just in it for themselves. A criminal smuggling illegal goods into the city, or a criminal that's just trying to be a vigilante. Looked at the same way by the Lord Governor and everyone else in the city, but you can be the thing that begins to turn it around. You can be that assassin that's been spurned or dishonored that's going through and taking out the corrupt political figures along the way. Or even aiding an inspector in an unwary alliance, namely just because his eye isn't on you at the moment. Or helping the Bluecoats. In more ways than just their police work to an extent, but hey, might get paid for ratting another rival out. And there's no telling what the Magistrates will want. They have so much power they can lord over you individually, which can take bribes, have its own specific interests, or just send you off to Ironhook prison. Or one of the other things that's worse, being forcefully sent out on scavenging expeditions outside of the lightning barrier, because yes, that is one of the punishments. Or heading up again another tier over to the city council itself, all the internal noble bickering, and especially because you have to vote a new member, when either they retire, can be done through intimidation blackmail, or the simpler, cleaner one, when one of them dies. There are plenty of old nobles bickering for those positions. So even when it comes to the various bits of general guards in an all-rogue or scoundrel game to an extent, they're still individuals, they're still factions, they're still broken up, have their own interests. So use them, exploit them, work around them, politic them, be that spider that knows where everything's gonna be moving. The right people to contact, the right people to threaten, the right bribes needed. With the very corrupt Law and Order of Doskvol itself, it's good to follow some advice from the book. Get rich before you get caught. Because it's not a crime if no one saw it, and it's also not a crime if you paid for it. Thank you for watching the video, and this was a good look at the general law and order, because, you know, you're gonna be bumping into that. Mostly an adversarial role, but you can also be vigilantes to an extent, still be an adversary. But also beginning to see the different people, power positions, and the different balance of power between the imperial powers with the Lord Governor, and the city council, and all the different local efforts. And weirdly, that like second act boss or intimidating figure with the inspector that comes in. Cause sure, you can pay off or just get past local Bluecoats, but an inspector brought from outside of the city? That's a whole different beast. That's an actual detective. But I hope this helped you with running the game itself or just interpreting or imagining what's going on a bit better. Thank you for watching again, and a thank you to my patrons, and have a nice day.